My true story from Florida. My DIL told me to sleep in the garage just for the weekend, so her friend could use my room. I stayed 2 nights, then left with the deed and the dog. I carried the steaming plate of roasted chicken into the dining room, letting the warm scent fill the air. I hoped it might bring back a sense of family, of belonging, something that had been slipping away for months. I set the plate where we used to gather, the 4 of them and me. I looked at Daniel, my son, and called softly, "Dinner's ready." But he did not turn. The chill in his gaze cut deeper than any blade. Daniel cleared his throat and said, his voice cold and curt, "Just for the weekend, Mom. Sleep in the garage. Sophie's friend flew in from New York. She needs the room more than you need your old book's smell." His words sank into me like stones. Before I could swallow the hurt, Sophie piped in with that thin, mocking tone I'd grown to dislike. "Honestly, if you weren't the grandmother of our kids, you'd be living under a bridge already." She glanced at me as though I were suddenly invisible, and I felt my knees wobble slightly. I swallowed hard and stood my ground. Sophie's friend could stay with Sophie in her room or at a nearby hotel. This used to be my room. Why do I have to move? I spoke clearly, though my voice trembled. Sophie laughed, an empty, echoing hiss, her eyes narrowing. "Lol, Mom. Expecting a 70-year-old to give up her room? You are delusional. A crusty old golden retriever lover like you can camp out in the doghouse for all I care." She was talking about me, but the cruel stab included Max, my gentle golden retriever, who had been my faithful companion since my husband died. Blood rushed to my face. I took a step forward, but Sophie's next move startled the room. She raised her hand, poised to slap me. Max sprang toward her, growling low and fierce. His huge frame filled the doorway, first standing on end. Sophie snapped her fingers at him, then kicked him without real force, sending him sprawling backward. Max whimpered and hid behind my legs. I dropped to my knees and held him, tears burning behind my eyes. Sophie stood over us, arms folded. "If you don't retreat to the garage, both of you can sleep in the doghouse," she said, voice icy. She turned back to the table. "He's just like you, ungrateful. You love him, you care for him, and he still bites the hand that feeds him." My heart raced, tears fell. Daniel shifted in his chair, watching me without blinking. I searched his face, hoping for some sign of compassion, but I found none. Instead, he spoke softly. Whether to calm me or justify them, I do not know. "Doghouse or garage, Mom, this is our house now. You are not what you think you are." I rested my forehead against Max's neck, breathing in his familiar shampoo scent. He licked my cheek. I closed my eyes and felt the tears escape. Daniel and Sophie returned to their meal as if nothing had happened. I gathered the plate I had set down and carried it back to the kitchen in a daze. Later, the garage door closed behind me with a mechanical clatter that felt final. The darkness, thick with dust and old boxes, enveloped me like a shroud. I set Max down by a folding chair, where I gently smoothed my scarf across the seat. He circled once, then lay down, his big head resting on my shoes. Even through decades of age, he looked up at me with trusting golden eyes. I sank into the chair and wrapped my arms around him. The garage reeked of gasoline and brittle plastic, and the metal walls echoed with every distant engine passing on the street. It was the coldest I had felt in years, but the weight I felt inside was colder still. I closed my eyes and remembered the good years. My husband, Bill, and I building this house ourselves in our 60s. Me with the paintbrush, him with the hammer. I remembered lazy Sunday mornings, orange pancakes on the porch, Max bounding through the grass. I remembered whispering words of love and safety to my children as they grew up to reach for their dreams. One evening, after a family barbecue, I caught Bill's eye. He squeezed my hand and said quietly, "If they ever betray you, remember who you are. Never let anyone take your power away." I had carried that blessing with me, until now, when betrayal felt like betrayal by blood. Max trembled again. I felt his body quake and wrapped the scarf tighter around us both. I whispered to him, "They can take my bedroom, but not us. We belong together." It was early morning when my eyes slid open again, the garage dim and still. Max lay curled at my feet, his breathing slow and steady. I stood and brushed off my shawl. I touched the boxes around us, the holiday decorations, old photo albums, and last year's tax returns. This was once my space, too. Max stirred and looked up with that calm look that told me he was still with me, still loyal. I walked toward the small window by the garage door. Pale sunlight crept through the dust, illuminating a single beam that caught Max's golden coat. I sighed and looked down at him. In that beam, I saw more than a dog. I saw resilience. I saw faith. I saw home. I knelt and placed my hand on his head. I promised him and myself that I would do something tomorrow. I would find out what happened to Bill's trust and what their real plan was. I would fight back, not with anger or noise, but with steady determination. And I would bring him back inside. We sat together, Max and I, watching the light grow, feeling something stir inside me, some part of the woman I used to be, the woman I knew I still could be. The night was cold and unyielding, but dawn was coming, and so would I. The second night in the garage was colder than the first. The wind howled against the metal like an unwelcome visitor, slipping through the cracks and whispering that I did not belong. I sat wrapped in 2 blankets that smelled faintly of mothballs and motor oil. Max lay beside me, his golden fur dulled with dust, his ribs rising and falling under my trembling hand. He had not eaten much all day. Sophie had taken away his food bowl. If the dog pees again, he's gone. You want to sleep with mutts, feed him trash like you, she had snapped at me earlier that morning as I opened a tin of canned chicken for him. I said nothing, just looked at her and then back at Max, who sat obediently, tail gently wagging as if he did not understand why she hated him so much. Maybe he did understand. That night, as I watched Max curl into a tighter ball near the foot of the cot they had left for me, I found my mind drifting back into the fall, the one that sent me to the hospital, the one that changed everything. It had been raining. I was trimming the overgrown hibiscus along the walkway when my heel slipped on a slick stone. I remember the crack. I remember Daniel's voice on the phone when the neighbor called him. Why was she even outside in the rain? I remember the sterile smell of the hospital, the way the nurse adjusted my pillow without looking me in the eye. Then came the suggestion, or rather, the pressure. Sophie said it first. She needs round-the-clock care. The rehab center has better equipment than we can provide at home. Daniel nodded. I did not fight. Not at first. The guilt of being a burden buried me. The nursing home was beige and sterile, the kind where birthdays are celebrated with half a cupcake and a laminated card. I stayed for 3 months. Each week I asked to come home, and each week, Sophie said, just a little longer, until you're strong enough. Then, one Tuesday morning she arrived with paperwork. It's just to simplify things, she said. It lets us handle the house maintenance while you recover. You're still on the deed. We just need shared access for legal stuff, repairs, taxes, emergencies. It's temporary. She smiled like a politician. I signed. I remember my fingers trembling slightly from the painkillers, my eyes blurry, my heart eager to go home. They let me return 3 days later. My room looked the same, but something felt off. The air in the house no longer belonged to me. Now, sitting in a makeshift garage bed with Max pressed close for warmth, I saw it clearly. I had not been welcomed back. I had been tolerated. A car passed outside, headlights sweeping briefly across the small window. I watched the beams fade, leaving shadows that felt thicker than before. My breath puffed in small clouds. The garage heater Sophie promised had never been plugged in. Max whimpered. I stroked his ear. It's okay, I whispered. We're okay. But I was not sure we were. I reached for the spiral-bound notebook I kept in my coat pocket. It was the last remnant of my old teaching days. I used to write lesson plans in it. Now it held lists, memories, warnings, bits of grief too bitter to say aloud. Tonight I wrote, if I am already the thorn, I will make sure someone bleeds before they rip me from the stem. I put the pen down and stared at the words until the ink blurred. Then I remembered something else, something older than this pain. My husband Bill, standing with his back to the ocean, salt in his hair and his hand squeezing mine. We had taken Max for a walk down Clearwater Beach. The dog had been just a pup, clumsy and eager. He had chased a crab and yelped when it pinched his nose. Bill laughed until his stomach hurt. That evening, under the orange-pink sky, Bill leaned close and said, "You are stronger than they think. You always have been. But don't forget, if they ever make you feel small, you rise taller. Do not beg to belong in your own house. I had forgotten, but tonight I remembered. I looked around the garage. Boxes piled high, paint cans, holiday lights, forgotten things, like me, and yet not discarded. I turned to Max. He had fallen asleep, his head heavy on my feet, his paws twitching in dream. I felt a rush of warmth, not from the blankets, not from the air, but from within. "We won't stay here," I told him. "Not forever." His ear flicked as if in agreement. Outside, the wind wailed again, but I no longer shivered. Not as much. Something was changing, and I was starting to feel it. It was on the third night, after the last cough of the wind had died and the garage lay still, that I found myself unable to sleep. The cold had crept deeper into my bones than usual, and Max, though curled tightly against me, could not keep me warm. I lay there staring at the garage ceiling, its wooden beams sagging like my confidence. Somewhere between exhaustion and anger, I knew I needed to move, not from the cold, but from the lie I had been living in. I got up slowly, careful not to wake Max, though his eyes fluttered open as I pulled on my coat. "Just a moment," I whispered. "I need to check something." Inside the house, the hallway lights had been left on. The soft hum of the dishwasher was the only sound. I tiptoed past the kitchen and into the back storage closet near the laundry room. Years ago, I had hidden a few things there. Documents, photo albums, keepsakes that Bill and I had promised we would never throw out. Things that had meaning, tucked away behind a box of old winter coats no one had touched since we stopped going up north for Christmas. There, behind a faded green duffel bag, was the lockbox, the same one Bill had kept in his study. I opened it with the key I always wore on a chain around my neck. Inside were the original documents, the deed to the house, our joint accounts, and one thin envelope marked Last Will and Testament, William L. Myers. I sat down on the floor right there. My hands shook as I opened it, not from cold this time, but anticipation. I read every line, every clause. The house was to remain in my name until my death. Afterward, it would go to Daniel, but only if I chose not to remarry or legally transfer ownership beforehand. Bill had made that clear. For her lifetime use. Uncontested, the will stated. The pages were notarized, signed with witnesses, legitimate. But the version I had signed at the nursing home, the one Sophie had slid across the vinyl table while smiling like a realtor at a foreclosure auction, that was different. I remembered it clearly. No notary, no witness but her. The language had been vague, supposedly temporary. I pulled that copy from my coat pocket where I had folded it the night before. Comparing the two side by side under the dim closet light, my breath caught. The dates didn't align. Their version referenced rights Bill never granted. It implied a living trust that had never existed. They had faked it. Not well, but just enough to fool someone tired, someone sick, someone desperate to come home. I reached for my phone and snapped photos of every page, Bill's will, the deed, the signatures. My hand steadied with each click. I knew what I was seeing. And now I had proof. As I tucked the originals back into the lockbox, I felt a gentle nudge at my knee. Max had found me. I looked down to see his nose pressed against my leg, his eyes soft, questioning. "You followed me, huh?" I said, quietly. He sat down beside me, tail thumping once against the wall, as if to say, "I am here. I believe you." I slipped the photographed copies into my coat pocket and relocked the box. I would not leave the originals behind. But I needed a plan, one that did not make me look like a bitter old woman, but rather a mother who had been quietly betrayed. Back in the garage, I pulled out my notebook and wrote, "They do not want me to fight. They want me to disappear. But if I am going to vanish, it will be on my terms, with the truth written in ink, not in forgery." Max settled beside me again, this time resting his head in my lap. I placed the folded documents into the lining of my coat, then reached over to pull an old flannel blanket tighter around us both. Out in the world, they still believed I was broken, a burden, an inconvenience. But in that moment, with proof warming against my chest and a loyal golden retriever sleeping soundly beside me, I felt something else entirely. I felt ready. Gabe answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Myers?" His voice was careful, respectful, like the boy I remembered from the front row of my English class 2 decades ago. It has been a long time. Yes, I said softly, but I remembered you once told me, if you ever need help again, real help, call me. I paused. I need help. Gabe had gone to law school, graduated top of his class, and specialized in elder protection. I had seen his name in the paper once, defending an elderly man whose family had tried to declare him incompetent to seize his assets. Gabe won, with grace, with fire. Within 2 hours he was at my house. I let him in through the side gate, Mac wagging his tail cautiously. We sat in the garage. It was the only place they would not dare interrupt. I have the original documents, I said, placing the photos and copies of Bill's will on the folding table between us. And this. I handed him the unsigned transfer Sophie had me ink at the nursing home. This is what they used to file a fake deed. Gabe looked over every line in silence, his brow furrowed. This isn't just fraudulent, it's criminal. No witness, no notary. They used your temporary incapacity after your fall to pressure you into signing something invalid. I nodded. They assumed I would not know better. You do, he said. And now, so will the state. By the next morning, Gabe had filed a formal notice of fraudulent conveyance with the property registrar. He submitted copies of the original will and requested an injunction to block further transactions on the house. He also prepared a trust in my name, one that gave me sole control and designated a non-profit animal rescue as successor beneficiary. I want to donate the house to them, I said, signing the final page of the trust. Eventually, but first, I want to reclaim it. You are within your rights, Gabe assured me, and within your power. That evening, just before sunset, I received an email from Gabe titled, Confirmed, Unlawful Conveyance. I opened it with trembling hands. Attached was a scanned letter, on official letterhead from the county property office, marked with a bright red seal and the words, Inventory Transformation, Notarization Absent. The letter confirmed what we already knew. The deed Sophie submitted was legally void. I printed it, ran my fingers across the red stamp, and felt the validation ripple through me, not just legal, but moral. They had tricked me, but the law now stood beside me, quiet, unshakable. When I stepped out of the garage that afternoon, something had changed. My back felt straighter, my voice didn't shake when I asked Daniel and Sophie to pick the kids up from school. I needed the house to myself, I said. They blinked, but did not question. I went into my room, and for the first time in months, I packed my belongings, not with sorrow, but with purpose. Clothes, journals, photographs, a small teapot Bill had given me on our 20th anniversary. I packed Max's things too, his leash, his bowls, the tattered old duck toy he still carried from room to room like it meant something. And then I placed a letter on my pillow. It read, To Daniel and Sophie, I leave this house, temporarily, but I reclaim its soul. You took the warmth of this home and froze it with greed. I will not argue, I will not scream, I simply take back what was always mine. The law agrees, the documents prove it. This house was built by love. You tried to hollow it with entitlement. You failed. Max and I are going where love still has roots. I am not exiled, I am released. Garage was exile. But it gave me a way out. Max sat by the door as I zipped the last suitcase shut. I looked around the room one last time. The framed photo of Bill stayed behind. Not out of sentiment, but because I wanted them to see the man who once built a life here, and to remember what they had turned it into. I left through the back gate, just as Gabe's car pulled up the driveway. He opened the passenger door. Max jumped in first, I followed, and we drove away, not into the unknown, but into something I had forgotten was possible. Freedom. It was a Thursday morning, unusually bright for February. I had just finished steeping a pot of green tea, when I heard the shouting from the front porch. Civil investigators are at the gate. Sophie's voice shrieked through the hallway like a wounded bird. They're asking for you, Mom. They have paperwork, bad paperwork. I did not rush. I placed 2 porcelain cups on a tray, poured the tea slowly, and carried it to the table where Max was already sitting, alert, tail thumping against the floor. He sensed something was happening. This time, it was not fear. It was justice. Daniel barreled into the kitchen. Mom, he said, voice cracking, they're here about the deed, the old one. They said there's a dispute, some complaint filed about fraudulent transfer. I looked at him over the rim of my cup. Yes, I said calmly. That complaint was from me. His eyes widened. You? What the hell, Mom? We were going to handle all this. You said— I said nothing, I cut in. You assumed I would stay silent. Outside, a knock at the door. Not pounding, measured, official. Sophie's face had turned white. She gripped the back of her chair like it was the only thing holding her upright. You can't let them do this, she hissed. We're family. You can't just throw us under the bus. I stood, still holding my tea. When I asked for a blanket in the garage, I said softly, what did you see me as? When Max shivered beside me and you laughed from your warm bed, what was I worth to you then? Sophie opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her hand twitched, almost reaching for mine, but I stepped back. The front door opened. 2 uniformed officials entered with badges and clipboards. One of them addressed me directly. Mrs. Myers, we're here to follow up on your report regarding unlawful property transfer and elder coercion. We'd like to verify your documents and take a brief statement. I nodded. I have everything ready. Come in. Daniel looked like he might faint. Sophie stumbled to the couch. She's confused, she tried. She's old. Maybe she misunderstood. The younger officer turned toward her. Ma'am, we'll take statements separately, but we've already reviewed the will. The forensic handwriting analysis flagged the previous signature as likely forged. Daniel whispered, We're screwed. I turned back to the hallway where Max sat, ears perked, watching like he knew the story was reaching its turn. I walked over, knelt beside him, and rubbed behind his ears. You were the first one who stood up for me, I murmured. He licked my hand. That afternoon, the civil investigation launched in full. Papers were collected, testimony recorded. Sophie wept, cursed me under her breath, then wept again. Daniel tried to negotiate, tried to blame everything on her. I watched it all unfold without speaking. Like a teacher watching a class full of cheats, finally caught by the principal. By evening, the officers left with files in tow. Nothing was arrested yet, but the wheels were turning. The house was legally frozen. My trust stood. My complaint had weight. Daniel approached me as the sun began to set. Mom, he said quietly, can we talk? You had your chance to talk, I replied. That night you sent me to sleep in the garage, you talked plenty. He tried to smile. We didn't mean it to go this far. I nodded. That's always the way it goes. Until someone draws a line. Max barked once, sharp and strong, then laid his head on my feet. I looked down at him, then up at Daniel. For years, I said, I let you redraw the lines around my worth. You made me smaller, quieter, more convenient. But today I stepped outside those lines, and I am not going back. The investigator's visit marked a silent turning point. The chaos that once filled the house seemed to retreat into corners. Sophie stopped slamming cabinet doors. Daniel stopped pretending to smile. But their silence did not come from guilt. It came from calculation. 2 days later, I made my decision. I contacted Second Leash Sanctuary, the dog rescue center where I had once volunteered with Robert before his stroke. They remembered me. They remembered Max, too. He was the pup we almost adopted from them years ago. They were expanding, looking for a new property to turn into a training and recovery facility. I offered them mine. The executive director, a woman named Charlene, nearly dropped the phone. Mrs. Myers, you're donating your home? Are you sure? Yes, I said, I'm sure. But it's not a donation, it's a statement. By Friday, the trust papers had been amended, ownership transferred. I retained residence, only for 2 more weeks, enough time to pack my belongings and transition Max. When I informed Daniel and Sophie, they were seated at the kitchen island. They had just returned from a desperate visit to their bank. The house is being transferred, I said plainly. It'll belong to a non-profit starting next month. Sophie blinked. You're selling it? No. Donating to a rescue for dogs who've been abandoned, abused, or left to die. Her face twisted. You're out of your mind. This house is worth $500,000. You're just, handing it to a bunch of mutts? Daniel muttered. We can contest that. You can try, I said calmly, but the paperwork's clean, verified. My claim was proven valid. Yours was not. Tears sprang to Sophie's eyes, but they were not the tears of grief. They were the tears of greed denied. You could have given it to us, she spat. We're your family. No, I said, voice firm as the stone path Robert once laid to the garden. Family does not treat elders like pests. Family does not fake signatures. Family does not make mothers sleep beside lawnmowers. Sophie clutched the counter like she might fall. You're destroying us. No, I said. I'm setting us free. You from the house you never respected. Me from the family who never protected me. She covered her face. Mom, please. I turned to Daniel. Do you remember what you said to me the night you sent me to the garage? He swallowed hard but said nothing. You told me I wasn't human property anymore, that the garage or the doghouse was good enough. Now this house will serve those who love unconditionally, even when they are broken, especially when they are broken. Max sat beside me, golden fur glowing in the morning light. He licked my hand once and wagged his tail. This house was never about walls or rooms, I said. It was about memory, love, dignity. You hollowed it out, so now I'm rebuilding its meaning without you. I walked upstairs, packed only what I needed. The rest, furniture, appliances, even the piano, would stay. Charlene's team would convert the living room into a therapy space for veterans with PTSD. The backyard would become a dog run. My bedroom would be a quiet room for new rescues, scared and shaking. That evening, I stood at the threshold, Max beside me, Sophie still crying. Daniel nowhere to be seen. You know what this place will become? I asked her gently. A home. Something you never allowed it to be. I closed the door behind me. Max and I stepped into a new beginning. The new apartment sat 2 blocks from the ocean, modest, second floor, a balcony that faced the sunrise and caught the wind just right in the evenings. Max took to it immediately. He'd nose open the sliding door each morning and sit at the railing, ears perked like a little golden sentinel watching over his domain. We unpacked slowly. I placed my favorite rocking chair in the corner by the window, hung Robert's photo above the desk. There were no more shouts down the hallway, no sarcastic sighs, just the hum of waves and the distant call of seabirds. At night, I made tea, green jasmine, and played the same dusty jazz station Robert used to love. His voice lived in memory now, not in the walls of any house, but here he felt closer somehow. Maybe because I had finally come home to myself. I started writing again. At first it was just for me, a way to empty the ache that had built up over years of silence. But then I posted one piece on a local senior forum. I titled it, They Called Me Trash. I took out the garbage. It spread. Emails trickled in. Then hundreds. Women from across the country. Widows, caregivers, daughters turned ghosts in their own homes. Some told me they wept. Some told me they were packing bags. So I created a blog, The Quiet Chair, a place for women like me, not to rage, but to remember, to reclaim, to remind the world that aging does not make us invisible, it makes us undeniable. By the end of the month, I had 12,000 followers. A retired professor from Michigan asked if she could translate my posts for her university. A woman from Georgia offered to knit Max a sweater. And then the message came from Sophie. It was 7:03 p.m. I had just posted a new essay, Inheritance is not a right, respect is. Her message was short. If I'm crying over what I lost, I guess I never grew up. I stared at it, no venom, no plea, just that. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off the phone, poured more tea and looked at Max. He had aged in these weeks, or perhaps I had just started seeing it clearly. The graying around his muzzle, the way he limped slightly after long walks. But his eyes held something new, a kind of peace. Later that week, I wrote a letter to my state senator. I told him what had happened to me, not for sympathy, but for policy. There are no laws protecting elderly homeowners from coercion, no penalty when family tricks you into signing away what you built. There should be. I signed it. Mrs. Evelyn Myers, former teacher, widow, trash, turned witness. A few days later, his office called. They wanted to meet, so I dressed in my Sunday best, not to impress, but to remind them who they were speaking to, a woman who had survived the slow erasure of her life by those who once cried in her arms, a woman who had crawled out of the garage with her dignity intact and her dog by her side. They listened. Change was slow, but the door had opened, and for the first time in years, I felt useful. Not in the way I had been used, but in the way Robert used to smile when I explained a tough poem to my students, like I mattered. This life, small, quiet, sunlit, it was enough. Max curled at my feet each night as I typed, and in the stillness I knew I had not lost a home, I had found one. The grand opening took place on a sunny Saturday morning under a canopy of bright white tents and blue sky. The new sanctuary bore no corporate name, no donor plaques or brass statues, just a hand-painted sign at the front gate. Max's house, a haven for the forgotten people came, dozens, then hundreds. Retirees, local reporters, children who knelt to pet the dogs, unaware of the stories behind every leash. And Max, he trotted beside me in his new blue vest, tail wagging, golden fur gleaming like a sunrise in motion. Gabe stood to the side, holding a thick folder. He smiled when he caught my eye. He had worked tirelessly with me these past weeks, not just as a lawyer, but as someone who remembered me as Mrs. Myers, the best teacher in 9th grade. Now he stood beside me not as a student, but as a fellow builder of something lasting. I stepped up to the small stage, the crowd falling into a hush. Max sat at my feet. I used to sleep in a garage, I began, voice steady. It was cold, damp. It smelled of oil and regret, and yet, in that place, I found something no one expected me to find. A way out. I paused. The wind fluttered the edge of my skirt. They told me I was too old, too soft, too quiet. But I was not born to be stepped over. I was born to stand up. Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then thunderous. Gabe took the mic next. He held up a piece of paper, one of my blog entries, printed neatly on white cardstock. He read, "Even trash has value in the right hands. But rot lives in those who forget who gave them life." Gasps echoed. A few nodded. Some wept. And then I saw them. At the edge of the crowd, Daniel and Sophie. Sophie wore sunglasses. Daniel had trimmed his beard, dressed in the shirt I once bought him for his job interview. They looked out of place, fragile. For a moment, I thought they might turn and leave, but instead they stepped forward, and in front of everyone, they bowed their heads. "I'm sorry, Mom," Daniel said. His voice broke. "We were wrong. I did not cry. I did not reach out. I simply smiled. I forgave you," I said softly, "but you lost me." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. They left shortly after, quietly, and somehow that was enough. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The Tampa Bay Times ran a front-page feature, "From Garage to Glory, Florida Grandma Turns Pain into Purpose." My blog subscribers tripled. A national network offered to option my story for a documentary. The letters came in droves, some from elderly women, some from lawmakers, and a few from children, thanking me for saving the dogs their families adopted. And everywhere I went, people stopped to say, "You made us believe it's never too late. I wish my grandmother had your fire. You remind me to stand taller." But I did not do it to be remembered. I did it so no one else would be forgotten. That night, Max and I sat on the porch of the center, watching the sunset dip behind the tree. He rested his head on my lap, tired but content. I sipped chamomile tea and watched the stars blink to life. For years, I had tried to be small, to be useful, to be quiet. Now, I was simply me, a woman, a survivor, a mother who knew her worth, a widow who still loved, and above all, a witness who refused to disappear. Max stirred. "You know," I whispered. "They called it exile, but it was a beginning." He licked my hand in agreement, and somewhere deep in the Florida breeze, I swore I heard Robert laugh. "Thank you for sitting with me through this. I know it was not an easy story to hear. It was not an easy story to live, but it was mine, and that's why I told it, so that no woman like me ever thinks she has to keep quiet about what's done to her in the shadows of a house she built. You see, they told me it was just for the weekend, that I'd only have to give up my room, a room I paid for, I cleaned, I cherished, so that someone younger, trendier, and more important could have it. They told me the garage was temporary. They said it like they were doing me a favor, like I should be grateful to sleep beside a lawnmower and a plastic tub of Christmas lights. And when I hesitated, when I asked for the smallest ounce of dignity, they laughed. They mocked. They kicked the only creature in that house who still loved me unconditionally, my dog, Max, a golden retriever with more heart than any human in that kitchen that night. But here's what they didn't know. You can't corner a woman who's already buried her husband, raised children through recession and loss, and learned to smile even when the world forgot her name. You can't push her into a garage and expect her to disappear. No, that woman remembers. And when she rises, she does not come back quietly. They thought they were clever, that they'd fooled me into signing away my rights, my home, my value. But they forgot I used to be a teacher. I know how to read fine print, I know what forged ink smells like, and I know how to call the right people at the right time when no one's looking. And when I left, 2 nights later, I did not slam the door. I closed it like a chapter. I took my dog, I took my dignity, I took the deed, and I took back my name. Now, I live near the ocean. Max has a yard. I have peace. And together, we've turned that pain into purpose. You see, the house I left behind? It's no longer theirs. It's no longer mine either. It now belongs to a shelter for abandoned dogs, souls like Max who've been kicked, ignored, and discarded like trash. But trash can be recycled. Trash has value. And I am no one's garbage. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your mother, your neighbor, or even yourself, then I ask just one thing. Do not let it fade. Subscribe to this channel, Grandma True Stories. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, a friend, a daughter, a woman sitting silently at her kitchen table, wondering if anyone still sees her. Because we are here. We are still here. And let me tell you something, they never put in greeting cards. A grandmother's silence is not weakness. It is history, waiting for the right moment to speak. And when she does not raise her voice. She raises the roof. Until next time, remember this. Wisdom does not shout, it remembers. Revenge has no expiration date. And when a grandmother speaks, the world finally listens. Click subscribe and come sit with me again. I have more stories to tell.